in just the second Super Bowl to go to overtime. The Chiefs will bring home the Vince Lombardi Trophy for the second year in a row and the third time in 5 years after quarterback Patrick Mahomes rallied his team, which had been dominated by San Francisco in the first half. And former President Donald Trump said Saturday he would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want if it attacked a NATO country that didn't pay enough for defense. His comments drew fierce backlash from some Republicans, the White House, and leading Western officials, with the head of the Transatlantic Alliance suggesting they could put the lives of American and European soldiers at greater risk. Israel's military held the rescue of two hostages overnight, while local officials said the raid killed dozens of people in the crowded southern Gaza Strip. Now, this city is sheltering more than 1 million displaced people. At least 67 people were killed in Israeli strikes, and an NBC News crew that has been working on the ground in Gaza since the start of the war described the bombing in the area as strikingly violent, and he called it a deadly assault. Chicago, along with New York City and Denver, have struggled to keep up with the demand for housing and social services brought on by the influx of immigrants. And in response, Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson put a 60-day cap on how long people can stay in city-operated migrant shelters. The first wave of evictions will come in mid-March, with 5,600 people expected to be removed from their current shelters by the end of April. And in a new report that was published just last week, in the US, Black adult women are 6 times more likely to be killed than their white counterparts. Now, this is troubling new data. It says that homicide rates of Black women ages 25 to 45 across 30 states were the subject of this study. And this data was collected between 1999 and 2020 by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Former President Donald Trump, that is expected to file, and he probably already did, a last-ditch effort today in the Supreme Court to press his claim of total immunity from criminal prosecution. Now, a federal appeals court last week rejected that claim, and in doing so, it temporarily paused its ruling, saying it would return the case to the trial court, allowing Judge Tanya Chutkan, who's a judge in a federal district court in New York, to restart proceedings in the case that had been frozen during the appeal. And in some good news, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame announced over the weekend that Mariah Carey, Cher, and Mary J. Blige are among its 15 nominees who could possibly be inducted into the Rock Hall this year. Other great artists who made the list are Ozzy Osbourne, Sade, Lenny Kravitz, the late Sinead O'Connor, Dave Matthews, and Peter Frampton. Also, one of my favorites, Kool and the Gang. They're also on the list and maybe possibly inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame this year. And finally, Taylor Swift. Well, she was at the Super Bowl. We saw that yesterday. She hasn't even endorsed Joe Biden for re-election, but that hasn't stopped members of MAGA land's upper crust from plotting to declare, as one source close to Donald Trump calls it, a holy war on the pop megastar, especially, they say, if she ends up publicly backing the Democrats in the 2024 election. You're watching and listening to Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of Areva Martin in real time, and this is the hour where we go deep, where we dig behind those headlines, and we bring you those stories that people are talking about. Well, if you pick up any newspaper or you scroll through your social media feed, you will see the names Bill Ackman and Elon Musk. And Elon Musk is named not just being associated with his uber popular car, the Tesla, but Elon Musk and Bill Ackman have been getting a lot of attention lately because they are both billionaires, and they also have decided that they are going to be the face of attack on, or the attacks that are happening on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that were pretty popular in most of Fortune 500 and other companies, pretty popular in government and other institutions. But they have decided that these efforts somehow discriminate against white men, that these efforts somehow lead to candidates being in high places and not being qualified. And they've been conflating the notion of being qualified with being a quote unquote DEI candidate. Now we've seen this sharp rise in anti-DEI rhetoric, and as well as legal challenges, a lot of it coming after we saw corporations try to increase racial diversity efforts following the murder of George Floyd in 2020. Some of these companies have even stopped talking about DEI initiatives, while others are making substantial changes to their diversity programs. Some of these companies are even clawing back some of its DEI programs and staffing. Zoom, we all got very comfortable, very familiar with Zoom video communications during the pandemic in particular, and many of us still use Zoom pretty regularly for meetings and conferences. This is one of the companies that launched a DEI program after George Floyd's murder, but they recently fired a team of workers who were focused on DEI. Why are these companies succumbing, capitulating to these bullies like Elon Musk and Bill Ackman, who've decided to take it upon themselves? And obviously, they didn't start these attacks, but they definitely are giving oxygen to these attacks. They both have massive platforms, and they're using their platforms, articles in the New York Times, article in the Washington Post, and other national publications. Obviously, Elon Musk is using the social media platform X, formerly Twitter, which he now is the owner of, to really to rage this war against DEI. And in some cases, they have made a commitment to see DEI efforts rolled back by as much as 50% in this year alone. So we've been having conversations over the last month or so about DEI efforts, what successes they've had, and what efforts are taking place around the country to push back. We've seen the Mavericks owner and other billionaire types use their platforms to try to push back on DEI, these attacks on DEI, but we also can look at what happened with critical race theory and how successful Republicans and extremists were in convincing parents that their kids were being taught critical race theory, and how they conflated critical race theory with basically the teaching of anything that was related to Black history. So the question that I'm asking and have been asking for the last 30 days or so is, how do we successfully push back on these attacks on diversity? Because we already know the numbers are there, the stats are there, that companies that have diverse workforces do better. Their bottom lines, they make more money, they're more successful, they're more profitable. You would think in a capitalist society that that's all that matters, that companies would be standing up themselves saying, no, diversity efforts have improved our companies, have improved our bottom line. But contrary to that, we're seeing companies claw back programs, fire staff, and really, shrink rather than stand up to these efforts against diversity, equity, and inclusion. My guests today have been on the show before, and they both are DEI experts. They both are accomplished authors. And so when we come forward, I'm going to talk to them about what they are doing personally and what other groups around the country are doing, and what does a real pushback on these, what I call billionaire bullies, look like. Stay with us. More to come. KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580. At KBLA Talk 1580, we believe that caring for the community means caring about the climate. You might have heard that we announced a pretty bold 12-month, $2 million campaign to do 4 things: increase climate literacy, turn up the volume on communities of color in the climate conversation, connect everyday people with the resources they need to survive and thrive, and highlight frontline climate justice crusaders of color throughout this year. KBLA Talk 1580 will be bringing you insightful interviews on all of our shows to help raise your climate IQ. Each quarter this year, we will also be hosting free climate events in various communities throughout the city with food, fun, and forward-thinking conversations. Thanks to partners like LADWP, Metro, Caltrans, the Sierra Club.
Bra rubs under my. Oh, yeah. And what about down there? My. Totally. 4 out of 5 gynecologists would recommend it. So I tried it, and now I get 72 hours of freshness from my pits to my.
Ooh, I love that it's a spray.
Me too. And it comes in sticks and creams too. Go get your secret whole body deodorant.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
We are back, and in this hour, I'm joined by Fatima Gilliam. She's the author of a new book, just came out at the end of January. It's called Race Rules, What Your Black Friend Won't Tell You. Also, Dr. Deborah Ashton is here. She's the president of Planet Perspective, and she's a DEI consultant. Thank you, Fatima, and thank you, Dr. Deb, for returning to the show. I know you both were on a couple of weeks ago when my colleague Dominique DePrima was guest hosting and had a very robust conversation. So much seemingly has happened even since that conversation. Almost every day there's some article in the paper, and just earlier, the Asian American Caucus in Congress wrote to 100 companies wanting them to report back on what efforts they had made to promote and include Asian Americans in their workplaces. Now, a similar letter was sent in December by the Black Caucus minority caucuses, asking these companies to stand up and to go on the record and say what they're doing as it relates to diversity in their workplaces. Fatima, is that backdrop for the publication of your new book, Race Rule. And I was just looking at some of the things that your book addresses, and one is racial stereotypes and racial blinders and misperceptions. How are those things, racial blinders and stereotypes, you think, playing into this attack we are seeing on diversity efforts?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me back. I'm really happy to be here with Deborah, that I know you're going to introduce shortly. But in terms of some of the topics that I cover in my book and this broad attack on DEI, one thing that's really happening that I talk about in the book is focusing on a meritocracy, right? And that is at the core of what some of these attacks on DEI are, right? When they're going to start talking about DEI is racist, which is what is some of the discussion now, or DEI is anti-Semitic, or DEI is reverse discrimination. I tackle these issues because I talk about what is happening in society right now. And these attacks are very much around opportunity hoarding in a white-centered fashion and trying to create a changed narrative so that there isn't equal access to opportunity for all kinds of people, Black people, Asian people, you mentioned before, marginalized groups. And I'm here, and with my book, I want to change the narrative back so that we can have access to opportunity for all kinds of people in this country.
So, Dr. Deb, one of the things that puzzles me about corporations, the data is there. It's been there now for a long time, that diverse companies do better financially, that it improves their bottom line to have diverse voices, whether they're women or people of color in higher levels of management. So you think about a company who's just trying to improve shareholder returns, trying to improve, the profit of that company. So if you're doing something like including diverse voices in your workplace, and that's improving your bottom line, why would there be any question that you would end diversity programs, or you would fire folks who've been brought on to your companies to help you diversify them. Why aren't we seeing more of these CEOs who have profited from diversity standing up and pushing back on these billionaire bullies?
Well, I can't get inside their minds totally, if you will, but I will say this is that part of the issue is that some companies were always doing DEI as window dressing. You look at some of the companies where there actually has been progress, and some which had DEI, if you will, as a curtain on their window, but nothing was really going on. The issue is whether individuals truly believe that, in fact, they're growing the pie. The issue is that you still have individuals who truly in their hearts think that when you have more women coming into the organization, when you have more people of color coming into the organization, when you have more individuals who have disabilities coming into the organization, you are taking away from them. It is an irrational response. They're not paying attention to the bottom line. They're paying attention to what's, as my sister liked to say, what's going on in between their ears. And so therefore, they're looking at it is that, for instance, I'll give you an example. I was in one organization and I was talking to a white female, and the white woman I was talking to was very concerned about the fact that white women weren't being promoted as readily as men. And then in the next breath, she said to me that she was concerned that her children weren't going to have the opportunities that they should have because they were bringing in more minorities. It's interesting how people can compartmentalize, and they compartmentalize in such a way that they see their plight and they see when there's injustice to their group, but they do not see when there's injustice to another group. So they can say, my group doesn't have a level playing field, but yours does, even when yours also does not.
Yes, that's interesting. You're right. It's an irrational response. And you address some of that, Fatima, in your book. Give us some examples from the book about what are some of the racial blinders and misperceptions that you see at play in the workplace, that you see routinely at play in the workplace.
A lot of the things that you see play out routinely in the workplace, especially around, for example, microaggressions, right? The types of things that people say that stereotype people of color, right? Where they'll say that, or they'll classify them, for example, let's look at hiring, right? So within a hiring context, when it comes to looking at diverse candidates, the things that will take place that create barriers to entry is when people talk about not just qualifications, but whether or not someone is an appropriate cultural fit, right? And that's the kind of thing that they talk about only when they're talking about candidates of color, and they're not talking about culture fit or qualifications when they're talking about white candidates. That's when they start talking about meritocracy, and then not wanting to do a fair analysis of, is this even a system based on merit to begin with, right? Because it can't be that there is something inherently wrong with people of color such that they don't rise to the top. Because if you look at a lot of these organizations, right, you look at the CEOs, and the majority of the CEOs across the country are white men. And it cannot be that there's something inherent that is more superior about them. What is superior about what's happening with them is that they have a fast track pipeline to access to opportunity. And that is the problem. And that people need to expand and open up and not have these types of blinders around who's qualified, who's not qualified. And then when we're talking about the attack on DEI or in the diversity space, people lean into these tropes around whether or not someone has the right kind of qualification, whether they're a certain kind of fit, whether or not someone is articulate enough, all of these types of things that happen. But also getting to something that Deborah talked about before is, to be honest, let's just be frank about it. What is at the core of a lot of these things that are taking place, why there are barriers to entry, is because there is white supremacy. I have clients where I've spoken, and you can lay out the business case. You can say your company will be more profitable if you're diverse. You will have lower employee turnover. You will have a higher return on investment, whether that's you have senior people at the top, whether that's people who are on your corporate board, all of these things. You can lay out the data, right? And you could even have market demand. You could have clients, like you can have, for example, some corporations have said to their law firms that they want to have diverse people on these legal teams, right? So you have the market saying that you can have a more profitable company, and then you could have the client saying we're only going to hire you if you have diverse staff. All of these things could happen. And then at the end of the day, the senior leaders still will not diversify, still will not create an inclusive workplace. Because why? Because at the core of what is happening is just plain old-fashioned racism, bigotry, and white supremacy, which is extremely hard to overcome.
Yeah, I was going to say, so Dr. Deb, after George Floyd was murdered in 2020, it seemed like we were in this moment of racial reckoning where people were willing to have conversations about systemic racism and the pervasive nature of it, and talk openly about white supremacy and how, white supremacy, evades our institutions. But slowly over time, those kinds of hard conversations, were happening less and less. And what we saw happening too was, like, now this attack on DEI efforts. Bill Ackman, Elon Musk, and others, and they're not the only ones, obviously, but they are, they have huge platforms. They say that it's racist to talk about racism, or you're a racist if you're calling out white supremacy. So they're flipping it on its head and saying, Black people, you're being racist because we, quote unquote, we being Black people, are always talking about race. So, and that argument for a lot of people sounds really logical. I had someone in my own complex where I work out say to me, I wish you ought to talk about race so much. Like, like maybe if you just stop talking about it, it'll go away. So are they winning the war of words, Dr. Deb, in that regard?
I think the issue is that what makes people defensive? One of the things is that individuals, and I had a CEO years ago ask me, how come it's so difficult for us in the United States, especially, to deal with the issue of race? And I said, because race, the issue around race is the original sin in the United States. It's around Black people and it's about Native Americans. It's the original sin. And so people don't mind admitting that they were maybe a little bit sexist. They didn't mind admitting that they may be a little bit homophobic, but no one wanted to admit that they may be a little bit racist. It's a visceral reaction. The other piece is, because you're going to have some people who will shut down when you start discussing the issue of white supremacy or racism, is, from my stance with individuals, I talk about affinity bias. I talk about the fact that there has been research when
Wait a
you
minute,
look.
and do you do that as a way to not talk about white supremacy, or do you call it
I
affinity
do it as
bias?
a way for us to get to the issue of their biases. And their biases may be around whoever is the dominant group in any culture. For instance, the dominant group in the United States are whites. The dominant group in China are Chinese. Whoever's the dominant group in a culture many times are the ones with the power. And if they have the power and individuals are socialized to go and believe that they are better than, then you have an issue of, even, and I will tell you, even Black people who will think the white person's ice is colder. The issue
Yeah,
is, how do
hold
you
that
get them
thought.
to it?
Yeah,
Okay.
hold that thought. When we come forward, I want to talk about that because, uh, is that the way to have a conversation about white supremacy and racism, to start talking about affinity bias versus calling it what Fatima called it, which is white supremacy and racism? More when we come forward. KBLA
Okay.
Talk 1580.
Thank you.
Is the right time. More of Areva Martin when we come forward.
I'm Amber Payton. Here's the latest on the Black Information Network. The judge in former President Trump's Georgia election case is hearing arguments on misconduct allegations involving Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis. A co-defendant in the Georgia case has claimed Willis should not serve as prosecutor due to an improper romantic relationship with her special prosecutor, Nathan Wade. Willis, who is Black, is accused of benefiting financially by hiring Wade for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Democrat Marcus Flowers has filed paperwork to challenge U.S. Rep. David Scott in the Democratic primary. The AJC reports Flowers, who is Black, will be running against Scott, who is also Black, in the 13th Congressional District in May. Flowers is a military veteran who most recently ran to unseat U.S. Rep. Marjorie Taylor Greene in 2022. David Scott has been facing questions about his health and age. Fellow Democrats have been urging the 78-year-old U.S. representative to retire, but Scott has said he is prepared to run for a 12th term. That's the latest. I'm Amber Payton on your home for 24/7 News, the Black Information Network.
We advise of a singular crash in Anaheim, which is currently having CHP on the scene. The 91 East connectors to the northbound Highway 57. Now, the crash is in the carpool lane of this connector, and heavy traffic flow is coming from East Street, Raymond Avenue split. A stall in Irvine is currently blocking the right lane, causing a 15-minute stop delay from Irvine Center Drive on the 405 North at San Canyon Avenue. More heavy traffic back in Anaheim's 91 East between Highway 57 and Gypsum Canyon Road is over an hour running heavy. And on the 101 South in Hollywood between Hollywood Boulevard and Mission Road was for a 30-minute traffic jam.
For victims of drunk and drug driving, our grief is unique, but you are not alone. You always have a place at MAD. Call our 24-hour victim helpline at 877-MAD-HELP or visit mad.org.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Former UCLA star Deshaun Foster is the new head football coach at UCLA. Foster replaces Chip Kelly, who resigned last week to become offensive coordinator at Ohio State. USC's Juju Watkins is the nation's #2 scorer in women's college basketball. The freshman from Compton is averaging 27.2 points. USC is at home tonight against Arizona. Today's Black History Month sports moment. On October 3rd, 1974, Frank Robinson became Major League Baseball's first Black manager when he was hired by the Cleveland Indians. Before his press conference, Robinson received a telegram from President Gerald Ford to congratulate him. Robinson also was the first player to win MVP honors in the American and National League. Robinson later managed the San Francisco Giants, Baltimore Orioles, and Washington Senators. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we are unapologetic about amplifying voices of those who have historically been left out of the conversation. As we approach our 3rd anniversary this summer, the problem with talk radio in Southern California specifically, and America more broadly, is virtually unchanged. All day, all night, all white. We make no apologies for our prime audience, but true to the best of our tradition, we're committed to expanding justice and freedom for all. So when we receive messages from listeners like Neil, we just smile.
I realize that I'm not your target demographic, but I love listening to your station as it is the only progressive station on the dial.
That's us, unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
LADWP is proud to partner with KBLA to share with you how to start the new year without bill worries. We're here to help if you're behind on your bill or need help staying current. Sign up anytime online for Level Pay to set predictable monthly payments throughout the year, including for past due amounts. You can also check out the special extended pay arrangements of up to 48 months to help pay down your bill. If you're a senior or income qualified, you may be eligible for Easy Save to receive discounts and also qualify for free and discounted energy and water saving devices. You can get up to $15,000 for past due water and or sewer bills and up to $3,000 for electric bills. But you got to act fast. Funding is limited. You can reduce your past due bills and kick off the year right, because here at LADWP, we're here to help. Visit ladwp.com/cares today and find out more.
Art tells a story, your story, and inspires others in your community to do the same. This Black History Month, AARP is celebrating the undeniable impact and contributions of Black art and artists everywhere. We're thrilled to celebrate these creators over 50. Through their work and persistence, they make society a better place by bringing us all closer together. Learn more at aarp.org/Black community.
Linking social justice and climate justice all year long. KBLA Talk 1580.
The galaxy is safe once again.
In the pretend universe, kids play with pretend guns. In the real world, it's up to us to make sure they don't get their hands on a real gun. If you have a gun in the house, keep it locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Safe gun storage saves lives. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio puts music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
We are back and we're talking about the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives with Fatima Gilliam. She's the author of a new book out. It's called Race Rule, What Your Black Friend Won't Tell You. Make sure you pick up a copy of it where books are sold. And also Dr. Deborah Ashton is here. She's president of Planet Perspective, and she's a DEI consultant. So Fatima, and I don't want to put words in Dr. Deb's mouth, but she said, I think I heard her to say that she talks about affinity bias. So when I think about the attacks on DEI from these billionaire bullies, I don't see the word affinity. You know, they talk about being really clear on who they're going after, Black folks in particular, other minority groups. So I just wonder, you know, if we are going to fight these attacks, if we're going to push back on them hard, you know, are we going to have conversations using terms and words that some people feel uncomfortable about, like white supremacy, like white privilege? You know, or is it imperative that we use the language that is common, and particularly the language that's being used by these folks who have launched these widespread attacks?
Honestly, I think it's time to call a spade a spade. I think dancing around the issues, being diplomatic, being concerned as to how people may respond or feel overly triggered has not really been beneficial. If it were a beneficial strategy, we would have progressed significantly since the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Instead, we have a rollback on progress of the 20th century. In terms of these attacks, you know, what they're focused on are just leaning into, you know, a sort of color blindness ideology that, reverse discrimination, right? And what they're focused on is if there's sameness in society, right? This equality, which is what we really need to focus on, is equity, right? So not everybody has the same sort of path. People of color have a whole bunch of obstacles in their way, and that needs to be taken into consideration. But instead, what people want to use as a, you know, whether they're using dog whistles or they're trying to twist the words and use them and weaponize them against progress, you know, these things do need to be called out. And not only do they need to be called out, but they need to be, these bullies or these, battle of the billionaire bullies, as it is, they need to have some sort of pressure put on them, and the companies as well, right? They made these commitments after George Floyd. Many of them honestly were performative, but they still made the commitments. And so they need to be held to account in terms of what they said they wanted to achieve, right? Because otherwise what you end up is where we are today, and where people think things like affirmative action are problematic. Well, then the question becomes, if we're going to acknowledge that there is systemic racism, if there are structural barriers, if you don't like programs like affirmative action, then what is the solution to have a level playing field? And what they currently want is just to maintain a white-centered power structure, a caste system, as if it's 1950.
And so,
And I'm going.
Go ahead, Dr. Deborah. You can
Okay.
respond.
Yes, you did put some words in my mouth. I will say that. is, let me say this. I said we discuss affinity bias, but before we discuss affinity bias, we talk in terms of the fact that we, because of our brains, every human being breaks the world into them and us. We're tribal. And what I discuss is the fact that depending on who's the dominant group, and in the United States, whites are the dominant group, is that it then defines what is considered, if you will, normal or the culture. And therefore, that's the reason why, as early as the age of 6, you have children who go and see white as better than black. You have had studies starting in the 1947s, taking up all the way to the 2000s, where, in fact, whether the children are black, white, Latinos, or mixed race, they see white as better. This is not to say that you're not dealing with racism, because you are dealing with racism. In our discussions, we talk about racism, we talk about sexism, we talk about homophobia. The question is, how do you get individuals to go and get past their defenses in order for you to get them to talk about it? In doing so, you then have white men who will then finally come to the realization that it was never a meritocracy, even in the good old boys'
But
day.
where are these white men that are doing that, Dr. Deb? Where are these white men that are coming around? What the
Well, you
news
do
today
have the
is,
few.
well,
You
hold on a
do
second. What
have
the
the
news,
few.
hold on a second. What the
I'm
news
sorry.
is today is that companies are clawing back, that there
Mhm.
was a lot of performative commitments made, and they're not even willing to perform anymore. They're done even with the performance, and they're cutting these departments. And this isn't a simple, so there's no simple answer to this. I don't think
No.
there's a black and white simple solution, but I don't know that we can fight the billionaire bullies, the Ackmans, the Elon Musk of the world without using some of the same strategies and techniques that they are using. I mean, they're pretty transparent. Like Christopher Rufo, for example, who's also been out front of this issue, has a whole playbook, and he tells you what it is. So are we going to lose, in your opinion, this battle on DEI in the way that we lost the narrative on critical race theory? Today, people think critical race theory is something that's taught to kids in elementary school. Fatima is a law school graduate from Harvard, like I am. You're a Harvard graduate. And we know critical race theory is not taught in any classroom, in any elementary school in this country. Yet that narrative became the pervasive and prevailing narrative. So are we going to lose this battle in the same way that we lost the battle of the words as it relates to critical race theory?
I think what we need to do is what you are doing right now is making sure that we define what DEI is and don't let them define it. Part of what happened was that other people were defining DEI, and you did not have folks like Fatima coming out and saying, this is what DEI is. Part of what was going on was the fact that you had, and I'm going to go all the way and say, you had individuals who called themselves woke, who were actually defining what DEI was, and DEI wasn't what they were saying it was. And then you had folks who were on the right who were grabbing it and saying, okay, we're going to run with it. And the fact is that, as you know from the research, the individuals who are the far woke and the far right all are predominantly white, predominantly wealthy, and predominantly don't have anything in common with the average person. The average person, for instance, does not worry about if you call something a brown bag lunch. As one of the ladies who I know who has a, if you will, a hourly job, I told her about this here whole thing about Stanford University saying brown bag lunches were racist. And she said, what are they talking about? I said, no. I said, this is some elitism that has come down. And part of it is you had individuals who were elitists who grabbed it, and then you had the rights who grabbed it, and they then took off and wanted to define what something was in such a way that it turned off the populist group of the mass people. And what we want to do is get folks to say, this is what DEI is. DEI is saying that You have diversity, which means that you have representation across the board. You have equity, which means you're providing people the resources that they need to be successful. And you have inclusion, which means that people have a voice at the table. And that's what it is. And not when folks take equity from the right is saying that you have all the same outcome. No, it is. It's not. It's saying that you provide the resources so each and every person can rise to the top of their potential and contribute to the best of their potential.
Could I interject something for a second?
Hold on a second. I want to ask you a question, Fatima, and definitely you can wrap it into your response. We know that the average person like reads on a 5th, 6th grade level, and getting information to them, you know, trying to cut through the noise, all the noise that's in what we call corporate media, all the noise on social media. I'm just curious about how this message is going to resonate, because what you just described, Dr. Deb, I understand it. Fatima understands it. I just don't know that spoken in those words, though, is going to be understandable to the everyday person who's catching a soundbite, who's, you know, looking at a headline. And a part of how the CRT war was won was a very strategic, you know, strategy on their part, on the part of, you know, the Christopher Rufos of the world, to conflate CRT with everything that was related to the teaching of Black history. So I'm just wondering, Fatima, and you can respond to this, if we're going to win this battle, the battle of really preserving diversity, equity, and inclusion, and winning it in the war of public opinion, it seems like to me it's got to be a much simpler message that people can that will resonate and people can grab hold to.
Well, I think the simple message is an attack on DEI is an attack on Black people. An attack on DEI is an attack on people of color in the most simplest terms. And before you can even get into an organization to hold them account in terms of whether they pull back from their performative pledges and those kinds of things, but people need to understand at a basic level that they need to be personally involved. They cannot sit back and let someone else solve this. Before you can even talk to an organization and explain to them all of these, you know, internal structural challenges that they have as an organization, you know, to sort of make the business case, all of that kind of stuff, they have to have pressure. Right. And I think where we are right now, when we have an attack on DEI, it is time for pressure, and then the arguments can come later. And by that, I mean, people need to be pressuring, you know, their local school. They need to be pressuring their elected officials. They need to be pressuring their employer. They need to be pressuring, you know, people with power and influence. Because if that's not happening, nothing is going to happen. Because the reality is, deep down, a lot of these people don't care anyway. So the only way that they're going to care is if their customers and their employees and their key stakeholders.
But that's my point, Fatima. The pressure, yes, I agree, but you're not going to motivate people to apply that pressure if the message that is being disseminated is not one that resonates with them. So as I'm talking to people about these attacks, for the most part, unless it's some really small circle of, you know, academic type folks, people don't they don't even understand it. And I'm not suggesting people are stupid, but you know, there's just so much information that comes at people. It's very hard to get people to focus on anything. So I'm not going to go to my company. I'm not going to go to my elected official and apply pressure to something that has not hit me, you know, in a way that feels like this matters to me, like abortion. So we can use that as an example. We've seen women go out, even in red states like Ohio and Kentucky, and fight against initiatives that are, you know, efforts to restrict abortions or to fight for enshrining abortion rights into their state constitutions, because they understood the overturning of Roe v. Wade means you can't have an abortion in this state, and abortion is a woman's right. So there's a message about that resonated with women and men, but that caused people to go out and take the action, the pressure action that you are talking about. So I think I'm not convinced yet. Hold on a second. I'm not convinced yet that we figured out what that message is and that it's resonating. Hold your thought. When we come forward, I'll give you an opportunity to respond. Stay with us. KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to Areva Martin in real time on KBLA Talk 1580. KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580, connecting you with services and solutions. Stay Housed LA has the resources you need to know your rights and the legal support to back them up. The COVID-19 pandemic has cost people their jobs and livelihoods. This has left an estimated 1/3 of households not being able to make rent and facing losing their homes. This is a fear no one in our community should have to face. You have rights, though, and Stay Housed LA is here to help. Stay Housed LA is a partnership between the County of Los Angeles, the City of Los Angeles, and local community and legal service providers. Together, they provide tenants with the information and support needed to exercise their rights so they can remain safely in their homes. Find out more about your rights by participating in a virtual tenant workshop. Get the legal assistance you need. Find additional resources in Los Angeles County and the City of Los Angeles. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA County for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. Stay connected to Stay Housed LA for updates. This and more at stayhousedla.org. That's stayhousedla.org. Or call their hotline at 213-694-0040. We've got your Black with a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580. At KBLA Talk 1580, we do Black history every single day. In fact, as the only Black talk radio station west of the Mississippi, we are Black history. Our annual Black History Month luncheon is fast approaching, and we want to be sure to give you ample time to get your company, organization, church, or group to join us at this year's celebration on the last day of the month, Thursday, February 29th at noon. Last year, we honored iconic local Black media personalities, including Pat Harvey, Jim Hill, Mark Brown, Beverly White, Sandy Banks, and Pat Prescott, and raised $20,000 in scholarships. This year, we're honoring Black Hollywood creatives who have used their artistic genius as climate justice champions. This year's luncheon, we will be showcasing and sharing their inspiring work on our big screen. Plus, a scrumptious meal, live music, great company, and lots of fun with your favorite KBLA Talk 1580 hosts. So contact us today at info@smileyAudiomedia.com or call 323-290-4690. That's info@smileyAudiomedia.com or call 323-290-4690. We hope to see you Thursday, February 29th as we close out Black History Month. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your Black. Your Black.
All right, Fatima, you wanted to respond to my comment about the message resonating with everyday people.
I think in terms of the simplest way to put it is asking people, do they feel the system is rigged? If they feel the system is rigged and discriminating against them, then DEI is the pathway to equality. DEI is the pathway to fairness, right? We wouldn't need DEI if we didn't have DENY, right? And so I think to have a simple way of saying it, if people understand that there is a lot of inequity, right? That they try to get a job and it doesn't work out, that they try to get a mortgage and it doesn't work out, right? The reason why is because the system is rigged and there needs to be an answer to that rigging. And things like affirmative action and diversity programs are part of the answer to that rigged system.
Dr. Deb, what are you feeling in this moment, the best way that this pushback happens? Because I'm not seeing the billionaire, I guess the owner of the Mavericks, or maybe he sold the team, I'm not sure, but it's Mark Cuban is his name. He's been out front pushing back, being supportive of DEI efforts, talking about the merits of diversity in the workplace as a sports team owner. How come you don't think we're seeing more voices like Mark Cuban, the billionaire class of folks that I would imagine support diversity? Where are
You
those
keep asking
voices?
me where are these voices? Let me say
Well, you
this.
work in this
Is
space, so maybe
I
you've
worked
run
in this
across these
space.
people. I don't know.
I worked in the space where, let me be clear, is the fact that just like the one CEO who asked me about reason why folks have the difficulty dealing with race in this country, is individuals still many times are self-centered. At the same time, what I would like to do was Fatima mentioning is the fact that we have to deal with the fact that individuals understand, and it doesn't matter whether they have a college degree or not, they understand bias. They understand when the playing field is not level. They understand when we talk in terms of the fact that when I say dominant class, I'm talking about whoever's in power in any different culture are the individuals who set the stage. And that if you don't fit their, if you will, what they're looking for in the actor, you're not getting the part. And so when I talk about that, what I'm talking is that we know, and individuals, how do they pay attention? When you have individuals saying that unless you are white and unless you are Asian, you don't have the intelligence to go to a Harvard, or you don't have the intelligence to go to an Ivy League school, or if you're not a woman, or I should say, if you're not a man, then you don't have the qualification to be a leader. They understand that. And as I tell folks, I don't care if we have all three of us advanced degrees. As I tell folks, I started off in a cold water flat where my family was the poorest of the poorest. Let me be clear, is that when we talk about race in the United States, when we talk about gender in the United States, what we're talking about, who are the marginalized group? And as you know from what you were discussing earlier, as the women, Black women being more likely to be victimized, is that Black women are at the lowest part of the pyramid. Latina are then next in the lowest part of the pyramid. What we really want to talk about, though, is for folks to understand. We might talk about affinity bias. Is affinity bias the reason why it has an issue? Is that who's at the top? If you know who's at the top, then you know by definition, if you have affinity bias, they are going to pull in people who look like them and who have their background, which means that if you don't look like them and you don't have their background, you're out. When we talk about systemic racism, what we're talking about is biases that are built into the system, that are built in such a way that you may not readily see it, but you can look at the back end of it and know that it exists. And what do you do in order to get rid of it?
Yeah, we're running out of time, but I do want to ask you, Fatima, the same question I asked Dr. Deb. You worked in this DEI space a long time yourself. We see these voices of the billionaires who are anti-DEI, who want to take it down, who want to roll it back by 50%. I mentioned Mark Cuban as someone who's been fighting against it, but I can't really think of a whole long list of other billionaire types that have the kind of platform that Elon Musk has standing up for DEI. Why do you think that is?
I think people, play to their selfish self-interest, to be perfectly honest. And the way that the system is right now, they think and believe that it works for them, which is why I think it is critical for people to personally get involved and help create this pressure, right? Because we could be talking about this until we're blue in the face. All of us on this, in this conversation believe that DEI is important, but it's not going to be successful in terms of trying to combat the attack on DEI if people don't say, I have a personal stake in this, right? So if you're a person of color, you need to be helping to put the pressure on wherever you can in your community so that people like not just a Mark Cuban, but at a smaller company, a mid-sized company, or at their school will say, this is important because people are only going to respond to the pressure that they get. And like I said before,
I'm sorry, ladies. I'm sorry. We are out of time. This is such a big conversation. That's why I've already had you back twice, and clearly got to have you back a third time. But I do want to make sure people know that your book, Fatima, is Race Rule, What Your Black Friend Won't Tell You. Make sure you pick up a copy of it. Thank you so much, Fatima, for writing that book. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you, Dr. Deborah Ashton, President of Planet Perspective and a DEI consultant. Always great to be in conversation with both of you. Continue to lift up this work, so critically important. The next voice that you hear will be Robin Ayers in the Raw Report right here on KBLA Talk 1580. Don't touch that dial.